Classes in session.
And welcome to Unlearn 16 Classes in Session. And guys, today I know I might have promised you somebody else would be sitting virtually next to me, but listen, guys, sometimes you gotta roll with it, right? I'm just gonna fix my hat here for those who are watching. Sorry, I look a mess. But you just get me today. But in thinking about it, I think it was time that I go back. I think initially when I started this podcast, I started with my why. Why am I doing it? And I gave you a few stories. And I think today I need to go back to that time and I need to give you my origin story a little bit. And hopefully, maybe little glimmers of it you will understand and you will, maybe relate to as you go through your life. So I'm going to give you a synopsis. Are you ready? Here we go. So, I was born to my mom, obviously, Angela, my dad, Ross. They were married for, just a wee short time. Ended up getting divorced when I was young. And when I was young, and this was around 3, they separated and then finally got divorced when I was about 7 or 8. So at that point, my mom decided, she was a nurse in her entire life. She decided to pick us up and we were going to move and we were going to go live with my grandparents and we were going to buy a store in a very small, 1,100 people. We were going to own the general store with my grandparents. Now, you have to understand that part of my origin story is incredibly important. And of course it ties back to my dad and divorce and yada, yada, yada. But I'm going to give you some glimmers, all right? Just some pieces. You don't have to hear the whole story because heaven help you. So my mom was always a nurse, and I spent a lot of time at the hospital. A lot. In fact, my very first steps were to my mom's head nurse at her hospital. But here's what I learned. As a young kid, I watched my mom nurse. I watched her be this amazing individual that knew everything, that was incredibly responsible and hardworking and empathetic and a caretaker, and all of it I admired. And I watched her do that in my younger years, and as I got older, I still spent a lot of time there, even though we're about to take this little break and we're about to move up north for this kind of weird sidetrack to my life. But watching her do her job, and I'm very lucky that I got to watch her do her job, because I think that a lot of times kids don't get to see how amazing their parents are at what they are passionate about doing. And I think speaking of my origin story, and each glimmer of this is going to give you sort of an inkling into who I am and why I am. Watching her do her job, I realized 2 things subconsciously because I was young. Number 1, doing something well and being respected for that hard work and what you give in that environment is incredibly important and incredibly identity forming. So I think at a very young age, I understood, I was there. I spent every New Year's there. Back in the days we were allowed to do things like that. I helped with patients there. Back in the days we were allowed to do stuff like that. And I understood what that hard work looked like. I also saw an incredible level of respect that my mom was given. She gave and was given to her by both her coworkers, her bosses, and patients. Right? My mom also allowed me a lot of latitude in helping. And again, back in the day, when I was allowed to help, I asked patients what food they wanted. I took them things they needed. I spoke to them, a lot of older patients that I would speak to, and I would hear how they would talk about my mom and what she did and the importance of the job she did. And I think that's where when people say, who do you look up to? And I say my mom, I mean, that's a big reason. It's not just some random reason that sure, everybody respects their parent, but I don't just respect my mom for being a great mom and loving me and all of those things. We'll talk about that later. I respect her because I saw her do this thing external to me. It wasn't about me. Her nursing wasn't about me. but I saw a power in it, and I think I saw her as a more complete person. So the first thing is that, and the second part of my origin story here has to be, I saw my mom do something she was passionate about. She loved nursing, and some days it was hard, and some days it was traumatic. But overall, she was incredibly passionate about those people, about what she did, about how she did it, and how she affected the lives of people within that hospital. And so, right off the bat, I think I got two incredibly important lessons. Number one, you do something and you go all in. And I have done, and I'll talk about different jobs, but I have done many a job in my lifetime leading up to teaching, but I've always gone all in. It doesn't really matter. I've always done it to the best of my ability. I've always taken it incredibly seriously. And number two, I've always considered what I do a part of who I am. Some people don't, and I get that. Not your origin story. I get that. But I always wanted my job to be a reflection of that passion, or to be an expression of that passion, to embolden it, to grow it. And for me, those two pieces of who I am, of that origin for me, are probably two of the most fundamental things to who I am as a person, and why I am happy doing what I'm doing, even though it might be hard. I mean, guys, today at school, what a day. By period 2, I'm like, it's time for the week to be over, and it's Monday. But I realized that those elements that she taught me, not purposefully, those weren't sit-down lessons, right? She didn't sit me down and say, Joe, you got to have a hard work ethic. Joe, you got to do everything to 100%. Joe, make sure you're passionate about your job. She didn't sit down and articulate those things to me. I was incredibly lucky enough to experience them with her. And I think those are the biggest lessons, right? The biggest lessons we learn aren't the things that are necessarily explicitly stated. They are things that we get to be around and we get to see in action, especially from our parents. Especially from our parents. So those are foundational for me. Now, my parents did, unfortunately get a divorce, and it wasn't the smoothest of relationships, and I don't remember any of that. I'm sure subconsciously I do. Some, therapist out there really wants to have a chat with me about my deep, dark, whatever, when it comes to that kind of stuff. But guys, till I was 14, swear to God, I thought my parents got divorced because my mom liked figure skating and my dad wanted to watch MASH. That was the biggest argument I remember them having. My mom loved the Olympics. I don't know what she was watching. My dad liked MASH. I couldn't watch MASH until I was much older, just out of, pure protest. So I don't know how much that fed into me. I really don't. Subconsciously, yeah, sure. Is it a part of my origin story? Of course. But there's bigger parts of my dad that are part of my origin story, I think, than the breakup. Because the breakup also showed me something. And this was a big, in part, again, because of my mom. My mom made sure she was friends with my dad. And I don't need to go in their marriage, but for however that didn't work out for her, my mom made sure that her relationship with my dad was important, to make sure that my dad could always be around me and it was always happy. Like, for example, when they first got separated, my dad was at Christmas morning before I'd wake up every morning. He didn't sleep there, but somehow he managed to get there before I woke up. Anytime I would go to my dad's side of the family for Christmas or anything like that, my mom would always come with me. My mom went to my dad's second marriage. Why? Because that was good for me. Now, there are some people out there that's like, wow, Joanna, your mom, that's too much for her. Like, maybe she should, maybe, I don't know, but that's her origin story. I'm just telling you that what that gave me was a sense of stability and love and acceptance, and I didn't need to ever choose. I really never knew why they got a divorce until my grandma told me years later, which my mom's still a little upset with. So as they got a divorce, right, my mom needed help, and I spent a big part of my origin story is the time that I spent with my grandma, my mom's mom. You guys have seen her. She's Grandma Ruby. If you've watched on TikTok, she is, 96, no, 95, 94. She's in her 90s. And when I was young, I was babysat by her a lot. So my mom would go to work. My mom was a nurse, so my mom would go to work and my grandmother would look after me. Now, here's where some conflict started to brew. My grandmother started raising me the way my grandmother raised her kids, and my mom wasn't okay with all of that. Specifically, let's say with questions I'd ask and the way that she would answer them, or the way that she would, my grandma was a little bit more kids should be seen, not heard, whereas my mom was always encouraging me to have a voice and for me to have a say. And I think when those conflicting ideas happened to too high of a degree, my mom said, you know what? Now's the time for you to be her grandmother, but not to be her mother. So I was then put into a very lovely private daycare, and I went to a Montessori daycare. And here's where another piece of my origin story went. A lot of people wait to spend money on their kids' education in like high school when they're not doing well, right? And they send them to private school or get them tutors, whatever. That's backwards. I truly believe that by my mom sending me to this the daycare, and then I did my junior and senior kindergarten there, sending me to this kind of establishment, this amazing Montessori school that cost money, absolutely. So if you, I get, not everybody can afford that. Guys, I honestly believe that their perception of education actually formed my confidence when it came to it. So by the age, before grade 1, I was able to do the Three Little Bears in French. I think I was Baby Bear. Neither here nor there. But what I need to explain is that I think it gave me a level of, I then went off to public school for the rest of my years, but I still, no joke, have very visceral memories of this daycare. Very significant memories. And some of it's because my mom's told the stories or whatever. But I'll tell you a couple. Number one, I'm, kissed this little boy. I think his name was Jesse. Jesse, if you're listening, thanks. But it's funny because I've seen pictures. We look identical. I can't. The height of narcissism, I think, it was that kind of dynamic. Anyways, we got caught playing house or whatever it is you do in daycare, and the teacher got upset. That's not what we're supposed to be doing here. Whatever. We got in trouble, and we weren't allowed to have our apple that day for snack. I know that sounds kind of backward thinking about it, but guys, it's a long time ago, right? We're talking 40 years. Oh. Everybody can just pause, take a moment of silence for that unfortunate revelation. All right, back to it. Couldn't have an apple. And I went straight up, and you gotta know I loved apples. I went straight up to this woman and I said, that's okay. I don't like apples anyway. That's the strength and fortitude I had at like 5. And I had that strength and fortitude because my mom always said I was allowed to have a voice. And I think a huge part of my origin story is that my mom didn't just love me, and I think all parents love. I think by enabling me and supporting me and encouraging me to have a true opinion and a voice, it gave me a level of self-confidence and awareness, at the very least, to put myself in positions where I didn't feel shy, I didn't feel sort of anxious, I didn't feel any of those things because I had been given this strength from my mom and from my family in general to be able to have that voice. And I think that's incredibly important, right? So that was very, very young. Now, after my parents, separate and get divorced and the whole 9 yards, my mom decides at 7 years old, so I'm in grade 1, or I just graduated grade 1, that we're still going to stay. Oh, that's not true. We still stayed we were in Markham for a little while. We still stayed there for a little while because eventually I end up in grade 3, and that's when we decide to move. Now, in grade 3, I have a teacher who constantly wants me to stop talking so much, and I say to my mom, this teacher's really mean to me. She hit me on the head. She tells me I can't talk. So my mom listens to me. And this is also the balanced parent. She listens to me and says, okay, I'm going to go talk to your teacher. I said, good, go straighten her out, right? So she goes in, the teacher's name was Mrs. Self, and she says, listen, I know kids. Joanna has a very strong identity, a very strong whatever. This is how she tells the story. Do you mind telling me your side of the story? And Mrs. Self said, listen, Joanna doesn't stop talking. And that's great for her because she loves it and she's encouraged by it. She's very intelligent. She can do all of her work. But sometimes the other kids can't get it done because they don't necessarily have that aptitude to do it as quickly. So I've asked her to be quiet. I've asked her to stop talking to her neighbors so that they can get their work done. And one time, while she was turned around, I turned her head to the front of the classroom. My mom said, thank you very much. I agree with you. I'm going to have a talk with her. So when I say my mom bolstered me, I want you guys to be really clear because I think this is super, super important. You can love your kid, support your kid, give them all of this confidence in the world. However, make sure they're still accountable. And my mom always made me accountable. So when she went and had that conversation with Mrs. Self and she came home and she said, Joanna, that's not how the story went. And she recounted it. And she goes, so you need to accept your portion or in big portion. And then you kind of tried to lie. And I listened and I accepted it. And I said, okay, well, maybe. But I still don't think she likes me. And my mom said, well, she says she likes you a lot. She thinks you're incredibly smart. But she also thinks you're occupying too much of the other kids' time so they can't get their work done. Can you do better? And I said, absolutely. And I'll tell you, Mrs. Self and I went off to have an amazing teacher-student relationship. So I think my mom gave me all of this confidence, but also instilled in me a level of accountability. She never let me get away with anything. She never let me, sidestep responsibility, even as young as that. And then we go off to the store. So we moved up to a very small town so when I went up in grade 4, whatever age that is. And you got to do cool things. Mansfield was a super small town north of Toronto. And we owned the only store in the town. And my grandparents owned it with my mom and me and my 2 uncles also lived in the house. But it was a huge house, right? So my uncles had bedrooms in one area of the house in their own living room. My mom and I had bedrooms in another area, our own living room. My grandma had a huge room in her own massive living room. And then we had the downstairs that we shared in the kitchen. So we kind of had our separate living arrangements and sort of would come all together during the store. My uncles John and Ray were going off to university at the time. But I became very close with them. My Uncle Ray, and I'll talk about him in a bit, he's a big, big, big part of who I am and why I am. But while I was there, I started to work. And I mean, not a lot of child labor guys, but I started to work. And my grandfather at that point, who was, just a brilliant, amazing guy he was from Poland. He was an immigrant from Poland, an electrician in Poland, and came here and worked incredibly hard, built up, however much money being an electrician here. In fact, he laid all of the telephone wires all the way across Canada. That was his job early on, enough to save this money. He wanted to own his own business, and we went up there and we ran this general store. And then he let me work in it. And one of the first things he taught me was how to deal with money. Guys, I was in grade 4. And my first thing my grandfather teaches me is how to count back change. Show me where somebody knows how to count back change now. I don't care how old they are. Nobody knows. Want to know why? Because they press it into the till. By the way, my grandfather disabled that function. He said, if you're going to work with money, you need to understand money. You need to learn how to count it back. I learned how to stock shelves. I learned, we went and bought in bulk at a wholesale place. I learned how a business worked. I learned how to ski. Want to talk about my origin story? It's where I learned to play baseball. Now, it's a cool story because being that young, there was only, in a small town, there was only one kind of baseball to play, and it was hardball, just regular baseball. So as a young girl, I wasn't playing softball. I played hardball. So did if you wanted to play baseball, if you're a girl or a guy, it doesn't matter. You're young enough, you all play together. And I loved it. And I was good at it. And by the way, one of my teammates was Jeremy Taggart, who is the drummer was the drummer for Our Lady Peace, a very famous Canadian band. That's another story. He's going to be on my podcast later, I promise. So I learned, and I was great at it. And then my mom didn't want me to be a teenager in this small town. She thought it was a lot of bad things can happen in small towns to teenagers, and my mom wasn't as passionate about this store and about owning a business as she was about being a nurse. And she never really gave up on it. She did it part-time while we were up there. And so we were going to move back down to closer to Toronto in order for her to start nursing again and for me to be in a bigger city in order to go to elementary, like grade 7 and 8 in high school. And we moved back down there. And as we moved back down there, everything changed again. And I became, because it was just me and my mom at this point, and I became incredibly responsible. Now, some people might say too responsible for a 12 or 13-year-old. But as we shifted down there, I wanted to play baseball. And initially, we were in Oshawa, and it was fine. For some reason, the teams in Oshawa were fine with it. It wasn't until we moved to Whitby, which is another town, and they had an issue with the fact that I was a girl playing hardball. Because at this point, I was the only girl. And they're like, but why does she play softball? Well, because I've always played hardball. That's the sport I play, and I was good at it. And so, come Whitby, I had to try out. It's just house league, guys. I was never playing anything elite. I had to try out. We had to say, listen, let me try out for a house league team, which you didn't have to do. And if I'm not good enough, fine. But if I'm good enough, then. And I played there until I was 16. And it got increasingly harder. But being the only girl on a guy's team was a huge part of my identity, a huge part of my origin story. Because again, it taught me maybe I was different. I was definitely not the norm. And a lot of people looked at me funny. A lot of people didn't know I was a girl until I took off the back catcher's helmet. When I was young, I had short hair. And a lot of people questioned if I could play. And in that, every game, I would prove how well I could play. And all those people would walk away, and they'd walk away saying, holy crap, that girl is a great baseball player. I'd prove it to them. I'd prove it to the guys we played against. The guys on my team already knew. And that also gave me a sense of confidence in being able to accomplish things that I'm passionate about and I can be good at, even if everybody around me didn't think I could. Right? And I think that's incredibly important. And I played baseball right up until I was about 15, 16 years old. And then the differences between guys and girls really kicked in, right? I was a pitcher and a back catcher, and I realized that I wasn't able to play to the level that I would want to have played to. Now, looking back, could I have? Yeah, I could have worked harder for sure. But it's also a different era, different age. Now, I would push my kid, to play, because I think the differences aren't as big as we always thought they were. But nonetheless, sports gave me a level of confidence. Second part of my origin story, I roll into and I start playing volleyball at my high school. Now, most people are like, Joe, girls volleyball, who cares? Like, it's volleyball. Guys, my coach and that team changed everything. And I know I've spoken about it before, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but let me be very clear. I wasn't great. For some reason, the assistant coach saw me play rugby and told the coach that I had what it took. Take a bet on me. And by that, not by seeing me play volleyball, by that, he gave me a shot at the senior girls volleyball team, which, by the way, was the best team in all of Anderson, my high school years combined. Just the best team. any level, any sex, doesn't matter, the best. And he gave me that tryout. And what that showed me was I busted my butt because this team was everything to me. And I busted my butt to become a good volleyball player. I don't know about great, but I was a great leader. And I was a great athlete in the sense that I wouldn't leave anything on that court. And that taught me more than natural skill ever did. My coach was incredibly supportive. Gord Williamson was this amazing guy who was an amazing role model in my life. But what it really taught me was that if you want something enough and you're going to work for it, good things will happen. I never was the best on the court. Never skill-wise, right? Mostly I blame my mom because she used to smoke and I should have been an easily 4 inches taller than I actually am, which would have made me a much better volleyball player. But nonetheless, I'm not that bitter. But what it taught me is that determination, work ethic, and drive means everything. And that was such an identity former for me, right? And then I go off to university and I get my butt kicked first year. Want to talk about origin stories? I'll tell you an origin story. For some reason, I thought I was going to be a marine biologist because I saw Free Willy. I changed my entire career path in grade 13. Ontario had grade 13 at the time. And I went to university to go learn to be a marine biologist, and I sucked at it. I was brutal. Want to know why I was brutal? Because I didn't give it a go. I was so excited. I made the volleyball team. I was so excited to be playing university volleyball and had a scholarship in the whole 9 yards. That's all I did. I barely went to class. It was embarrassing. And it was a failure. My marks were a failure. My effort was a failure. Heck, I wasn't even that good at volleyball in that particular state. And I came home, my tail between my legs. Looked at my mom and said, I'm not good enough for university. I'm not smart enough. I don't know, full well, I didn't even give it a 30% go. But I was broken by a lot of it. I thought I was going to go out there and it was going to be so amazing. And I was playing volleyball and I was going to do all of these great things. I was going to go swim with the whales or whatever the heck I thought marine biology was. I don't know. I probably thought I'd be working at SeaWorld. I know it's like a 4-letter word now, but back in the day. And I came home pretty broken. People say, like, have you always been good at school? I've always figured out how to do well in school. I am now. I was never a critical thinker. We were never taught that, or if we were taught that, I ignored it. I once had a chemistry teacher say, you just have to understand it. Stop trying to memorize it. Start trying to understand it. I told him to buzz off, but he was 100% right. Stop trying to memorize it. You need to understand it. And I came home, my tail between my legs, said, Mom, that's it. I'm not going to university anymore. The panic in my mom's soul at that point should have been pretty big because all she wanted for me, right? My life was always about going to university. Always. There wasn't even a choice. And I thought I wasn't good at it. And I thought, I'd done so horribly, how am I going to get into another university? And I was stressed. And I thought, in retrospect, I probably thought if I just give up and do something else, I won't really fail at it, right? Because I already failed once, got horrible marks. You know that dream where you can't go to the exam because you've never been to the class? That was the reality of my biology lab. I had asked somebody where the bio lab was. If kids are listening, don't do what I did. That's a horrible, horrible lesson to learn. But guys, if there are kids listening, don't do that. What a waste of money. What a waste of time. And it sure as heck isn't indicative of my intelligence, just my laziness and my, avoidance. So I came home and I said that to my mom. My mom said, listen, okay, whatever you want to do. And I was going to apply to the police college because my uncle was a cop and it was going to be easy. They were hiring all these women. I was athletic. I was smart. Could have got a job with the police force. And my mom said, okay, but why don't we just try
to get into university, and then you can decide. And I don't even remember what the tipping point was, but I decided to apply to Western. And then I learned one of my most important skills. Are you ready, guys? Are you listening? One of my most important origin stories. And this is one of the things that happened that I did and that I use to this day. I picked up the phone, I sent in my application, and I called. I don't even know if you can do this anymore, but you can always do it in some way. I called the admissions office, and I got a woman named Carol on the phone. I should send her a fruit basket. And I described my story, and I talked about how hard it was. And I said, these are the marks that I got, but this is what high school was like. And she said, Joanna, because I chatted to her a few times. She goes, you're going to call me. I'm going to keep an eye on this for you, but I know it's going to work out. So I need you to do A, B, and C. And I'm going to help you with the admissions process because I couldn't go back to high school and do it the way we did it before. And I'd pick up that phone, and guys, I must have talked to Carol 5 or 6 times. And every time she learned a little bit more about me. Do I know? End of the story. I get into Western University. Do I know if Carol helped? I don't know. Here's what I do know. Making it personal. Picking up that phone. Putting yourself in positions and letting yourself get known. And sharing your story. And connecting with people never did any harm. And all it did is enabled me to be known to somebody, and for somebody within a particular organization that could help me to know me and to actually like me. And I think it's hugely important. I tell all my students that. Let people get to know you. Be a part of the environment. Offer help, offer skill, do whatever you can to make yourself important. Because if you're not going to make yourself important, who the hell else is going to? So then I went to Western. And at Western, because I was such a marine biologist phenom out in BC, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So what did I do? I took courses that I thought might be interesting. That's it. That was the extent of my planning first year, guys. I took an English course, English fiction. I didn't even read a book in high school. I hated reading in high school. I think I was just a little bit dyslexic. English fiction. I took a politics class. I took an ethics class. I took a philosophy. I took a history. And English fiction, I read 20 books that semester. Everything from Frankenstein to Jane Eyre to Homer's Odyssey. The Gambit, all of it. I read all of it. Dickens, and I loved it. I don't know what changed that semester. Maybe this horrific fear of failure. That could have been it. But I took it and I absorbed it. And then I started being a part of those departments that I talked about. So I took politics and I loved it. I took history and I did great at it. I read and I understood it and I used it. Right? And as I progressed in school, I got better. Every year I got better. I got better at what I did. I got more passionate about what I was doing. And it was like I accidentally rolled into what I'm passionate about, but I couldn't have done that without trying things, right? Without expanding my scope, without first absolutely sucking at chemistry, Simon Fraser. And then I'm going to remember this. I got to tell you guys this story. But come second year history, like my 4th history course, I sit down and it's an in-class essay for our exam. And we're talking about Napoleon, whether he's an enlightened despot. For the love of God, I'm not getting into that. But let me be clear. The course pretty much said he wasn't an enlightened despot. And I sat down before we went into the exam and I decided, yeah, he was. And I decided how I was going to prove it in my essay. And I sat outside the exam room with all the other kids waiting for the exam. Everybody's nervous. Everybody's talking. They know it's going to be this question, right? And they're all talking that they're gonna write an essay saying he wasn't an enlightened despot. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, he was. And so here's what I do. For about 20 minutes, I argue with about 7 different students, all writing in this tutorial. And I argue with them and I say, he is an enlightened despot. And then I go in to write the exam. And by the time I sit down there, I go, you know what? He's not. They're right. He's not an enlightened despot. That's how I'm going to write this paper. I wrote the paper. We go back to get it. And our TA is so mad. He's so mad. He's like, I don't know who you've been listening to all semester. And it's not that they're going to fail, but you wrote good essays, but none of you got it. Like, I don't understand how I could teach for so long and you not get it, and yada yada. He's going on and on. And he's handing back. He's only one person in this entire classroom got it right and did it intelligently. It's not that everybody else failed, because you can't fail an essay, but they're getting like 60s, maybe 70s. And I'm like, oh man, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. And he hands all your papers back, face down. And I pull my paper towards me and I pull it up. Guys, it was the highest mark I ever got. I got a 98 on my history exam. I did not tell my class I got a 98. I told my class I got a 74. And I tried to look disappointed. I put it down, slid it into my bag, never talk it about again. My origin story here, it's very clear. Making a solid argument and having passion and being confident. Guys, that's like 80%. 80% of the battle. But you know what the other 20% is? Being confident to make your argument, stand behind it, but being smart enough to listen to what other people have to say, just in case you're wrong. It's an 80-20 split. Be 80% confident. Say it with conviction. Say it proudly. Make your argument. Stand where you stand. But for the other 20%, listen just in case you're wrong. And everybody's wrong all the time, right? And that's all I did. So think of it as an 80-20 split. 80% confident, 20% shut up and listen, or only pretend you're listening and just take it in and make sure that if better ideas are said, you don't discount them because you just want to be right. That's stupidity. Make your strong argument, keep a 20% slot open just in case you hear smarter things being said. Then take them with you so you can get your 98 on your paper. So I do all of this, right? I get better at school, and every year I'm getting better. Want to know why I'm getting better? It's not because I'm working harder. It's not because I've memorized better. No. Because slowly, very slowly, I'm becoming a critical thinker. And there's lots of kids that are way smarter than me that are critical thinkers in grade 10. But for me, it took that time and it took that space for me to really understand all of that critical thought. Going back to my mom, it's amazing because every time I would learn something, I would teach her. She would ask me, well, what's this feminism? Like, what kinds of feminism? Right? Well, what do you mean political economies of the North and South? I've never read Frankenstein. Tell me about it. And I would teach her. Driving back and forth from London. And I don't know, maybe that's what gave me the teacher heart. Maybe her asking me questions allowed me to get more confident in my opinions and my ability to explain it and truly understand it. And then I saw my uncle teach. And my uncle Ray is a physics teacher. And I remember watching him when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and I was blown away by just the same things I was blown away with my mom. The work ethic, the drive, the passion, and for Ray, the humor and interest, and like everybody was listening to his physics lessons. They were on the edge of their seat. Why? Because he made it interesting and captivating and meaningful. And I saw so much power in that, even if it was subconscious, because I hadn't decided I wanted to be a teacher when I was in high school. I didn't decide when I was in my undergrad. I thought I was just going to go get my PhD, teach, right? And I think after my master's was done, and I really became a critical thinker, want to know why? It had nothing to do with school. York University went on strike. I was in international relations before that happened. And then after the strike, I changed my whole thesis and focus to teachers' unions and the necessity of labor movements as an international basis of workers' power. I know, very Marx. You guys are all, you're like, oh my God, she's smart. But what it did is it made me a critical thinker. And it wasn't just the classroom that did that. That was walking for hours and hours in circles with other PhD candidates, with other doctors, with other professors, talking about theory and talking about depth and talking about all of this amazing stuff. And at some point in there, I thought, I'm going to go to teachers college. I don't even remember it consciously happening. And I actually thought, I'll go to teachers college. If I don't like it, okay, just another degree I have, I'll do something else. And then I ran into Metro Prep. It amazes me all the things, and I realize this is a very specific stream of my origin story, but I think a really important one. And don't get me wrong, there's all sorts of things. And if you guys like this, let me know in the comments, because I have other roads that I can talk about that maybe have some weight. Let me know if you want to hear about those. But I think looking back at those pieces is incredibly important. A, as a teacher, B, maybe as a parent, but as a friend, as a person in this world. Because all of those lessons I still hold very, very true. That's why I always work as hard as I can. That's why I always put myself in new environments. And I could be afraid, but it doesn't stop me, right? I know that if I work hard enough and my work ethic is hard enough, I can achieve great things. And who knew that would come from volleyball? Everybody says they're their parents. Of course, my parents, but it wasn't the overt lesson. I want everybody to understand that. I think even as a teacher, it's not the things we say, it's about the way we act. It's about the things we do. And I think the more things we do, the more ways we teach in this world. And that doesn't just mean teaching in front of a class, it's just teaching in general. So that's the synopsis of a line. Let's call it, Joanna's origin story, part 1. I know there were no bats in a tunnel or anything like that. I didn't fall into any acid. Nothing traumatic. But I have had trauma. I'm going to save that for another origin story. I'm going to save that for a part 2. So if you like this, if you thought this was worth your while on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. to listen to, write a comment below. Let me know. Message me on Instagram. Let me know if this is worthwhile, because then I will take you on some other origin stories, some other paths, some other elements that have stepped into my life and that have changed how I am, who I am, how I see the world, how the world sees me. And maybe we can come to some cool origin stories together. Thanks so much for spending your Tuesday morning with me, or whenever you are listening to this, and I will see you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel. Have a good day, guys. Dismissed.